I still remember the day when everything began to unravel. Life in the countryside had suited my family perfectly, offering a peaceful retreat from the chaos of the city. But for some reason, my in-laws seemed to think of our home as an open invitation, a place where they could come and go as they pleased. This wasn't a hotel, it was our space, our sanctuary. My husband, Curtis, had never been a demanding man before. He had always been easygoing, content with the simple pleasures of life. But when his mother came to stay, something in him changed. He grew bold, even downright unreasonable. His sharp comments, once rare, became a daily occurrence. "No need to bring in people who look like they can't handle their own finances," he would mutter under his breath whenever my father visited. The sneer on his face deepened each time, his disdain obvious. My father may have been between jobs, but he was far from destitute. He had worked hard his entire life, building a business from the ground up. But Curtis, eager to impress his mother at any cost, dismissed him without a second thought. "If you don't like it, you can leave," he said one evening, his voice cold, his eyes challenging. I stared at him, a wave of disappointment washing over me. Pity filled me more than anger. The man I had married, the man my father had once admired, was slipping away, consumed by his own arrogance. "Fine," I said at last, my voice steady. "I'll go. But you'll have to handle everything that comes after." Curtis and his mother barely reacted. Instead, they watched me go with smug satisfaction, as if they had won some unspoken battle. "My name is Malene. I'm 33 years old, and I run a real estate company, a business my father built with his own two hands and recently entrusted to me. Though I now hold the title of company president, I still feel new to it all. My father only stepped down 2 years ago, his retirement sudden and unexpected. He had planned to work for many more years, but something in him shifted. He told me he wanted to focus on family, to reclaim the time he had lost. My mother had moved back to her hometown a few years prior to care for my grandmother, and after years of prioritizing work, my father decided it was time to join her. I respected his decision, but I couldn't help feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility he left behind. Was I too young for such a role? Was I truly capable of leading the company he had built with so much passion? I pleaded with him to reconsider, but he remained firm. "The employees trust you," he had said. "You'll rise to the challenge." And so, with his confidence as my anchor, I accepted. Around that time, I met and married Curtis. Our paths had crossed through work, and my father quickly took a liking to him, calling him capable and sincere. My mother, however, had her doubts. She warned me about Curtis's unusually close relationship with his mother, her voice filled with quiet concern. "If you marry him, you might end up marrying her too," she had cautioned. At the time, I brushed her words aside. Curtis had assured me that his mother valued her independence. She had a new partner, a life of her own. I believed him. After our wedding, we moved into my apartment, a space I had carefully chosen, one that felt like home. But when my father relocated to my mother's hometown, we were given the opportunity to move into my parents' former luxury apartment. Curtis was ecstatic. "It's so much bigger," he said, his eyes gleaming. "We'll need the space when we have kids." I agreed. The transition was effortless, especially since the apartment was owned by my company. From the moment we settled in, I could see how much Curtis relished his new surroundings. He would gaze out at the breathtaking view, a smug smile on his lips. "I'm so lucky I married you," he often said, as if he had won a prize. It became clear that he believed I had purchased the apartment from my father, possibly even received it as a generous gift. "How much did you buy this for?" he asked one evening, his curiosity piqued. He even hinted that my father might have simply handed it to us. I let him believe what he wanted, hoping that this assumption would encourage him to take some financial responsibility. But I was wrong. Curtis contributed nothing, not a single penny, assuming that as the president of a successful company, I would cover all the expenses. He took pride in our home, but not in the way I had hoped. He bragged to friends and colleagues about our luxurious apartment, flaunting a sense of ownership that wasn't his to claim. One evening, my father called. "Are you enjoying the apartment?" he asked lightly. Then, after a pause, he added, Does Curtis appreciate it? There was something playful in his tone, a hint of amusement that sent a jolt of understanding through me. He had told Curtis a story, one that made him believe I had depleted my savings to buy the apartment. And yet, even with this belief, Curtis had done nothing to help. He hadn't stepped up, hadn't shouldered even the smallest burden. He was content to reap the benefits, oblivious to the truth. We weren't owners. We were renting it, from my company. After we moved, Curtis's mother started visiting often. She adored the breathtaking view from our apartment, and one day, in a surge of enthusiasm, Curtis impulsively suggested she move in. "Your house is getting old, you'd love it here," he said, completely ignoring my shocked expression. His mother hesitated, glancing at me with uncertainty. "Malene might not like that," she murmured. But Curtis brushed her concerns aside. I was deeply unsettled by his sudden eagerness to live with his mother, especially since we had always agreed that personal space was essential in maintaining a healthy relationship. When I voiced my concerns, his response was sharp and dismissive. "This is my house. There's no problem if my mother lives here." His words struck me, not just because he disregarded my feelings, but because I suddenly realized something chilling. He truly believed this apartment was his. He had never bothered to review the rental agreement, which I had signed under his name. He had no idea that we didn't actually own the apartment. I didn't correct him. Instead, I calmly stated that if his mother were to move in, her new partner couldn't live with us as well. Curtis grew defensive, dodging my questions, his irritation mounting. Tension between us deepened, and arguments became more frequent, especially since he refused to contribute to household expenses. Feeling lost, I reached out to my father for guidance. He listened carefully and sighed. "I thought you two would live together long term, but this seems rushed. If it comes to it, I'll come and help sort things out." Before I could even process my growing concerns, tragedy struck. My grandmother's health deteriorated rapidly, and soon after, she passed away. Grief weighed heavily on me, and I reached out to Curtis for support. But he was unresponsive. When he finally returned my call, his voice was cheerful, indifferent, completely detached from the pain I was going through. He didn't attend the funeral. My parents were disappointed, but for me, his absence was a betrayal. I had never felt so alone. When I returned home after the service, exhaustion clinging to me, I opened the door and was met with an unexpected sight. Curtis's mother stood in the middle of the living room, beaming. "I've moved everything in. Looks like I'll be staying here now," she announced. Disbelief flooded through me. How had this happened so quickly? I turned to Curtis, expecting some kind of explanation, but what he said next left me frozen in shock. "Well, your grandmother's passing was perfectly timed," he sneered. "Now Mom can live here without any interruptions." His callousness was a slap to the face. My grief, my family's loss, it meant nothing to him. Rage boiled inside me, but I could do nothing except accept the reality forced upon me. His mother quickly took control of the household, treating me as if I were a servant rather than her son's wife. She expected me to handle all the cooking and cleaning without question. When I tried to confront Curtis, he dismissed my frustration with a patronizing smile. "You should be grateful to have such a supportive mother-in-law," he would say. As if that weren't enough, his mother began inviting her much younger boyfriend over, a man close to Curtis's own age. The first time I saw him lounging on our couch, his eyes expectant as if waiting for me to serve him, I was overcome with anger and disbelief. "Is she being deceived?" I asked Curtis, hoping he would finally see reason. But he merely shrugged, unwilling to acknowledge the unease in his own expression. Tension escalated when my mother called, requesting to visit for a few days to honor the relatives who had supported us through my grandmother's funeral. Hesitant, I broke the news to her about Curtis's mother moving in. There was silence on the other end before she finally said, "We need to address this. Your father and I will come." When I told Curtis about their visit, his reaction was instant and explosive. He lashed out, furious, his mother rushing to his defense. The atmosphere in our home became unbearable, every conversation turned into a battle, every interaction laced with hostility. I felt suffocated. This was no longer my home. With nowhere else to turn, I packed my essentials and left, moving into an empty property owned by my company. When I informed my parents, my mother's outrage was immediate. "Why did you have to leave? That apartment should be yours." I hesitated, then my father stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "The apartment was a rental," he explained. "Curtis never owned it. He never even realized that." A moment of silence stretched between us before my mother exhaled sharply. "Then it's time to set things straight." Determined, I returned to the apartment, the rental contract in hand. I placed it in front of Curtis, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to sheer disbelief. Reality crashed down on him. He had been living under a false assumption all along. His mother, however, was enraged. "I sold my house for this," she cried, her voice shaking with devastation. It was then that the full extent of her mistake came to light. She had been financially supporting her boyfriend, the same man who had been lounging on my couch, expecting me to serve him. And now, he had disappeared, taking every last bit of her money with him. She was ruined. With no means to afford the rent, now revealed to be substantial, there was no choice left. I placed divorce papers in front of Curtis, refusing to remain trapped in a marriage built on lies and disrespect. He resisted, but my father stepped in, his disappointment palpable. "I thought you were a better man," he said. "But I was wrong." With my family's support, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The weight I had carried for so long was finally lifting. Curtis and his mother were forced to leave, moving into a dilapidated house, their future uncertain. I later heard that her boyfriend had been arrested, but the money he had taken was gone forever. The financial burden they now faced was immense, a direct consequence of their choices. Curtis reached out to me multiple times, desperate to reconcile, but I refused. I could never forgive the way he had treated me, the way he had disrespected my family. When his persistence became unbearable, I made myself clear, if he didn't leave me alone, I would report him for harassment. Returning to my parents' home, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. My painful experiences had shaped me, but they had also strengthened me. My family's unwavering support reminded me of what truly mattered: respect, integrity, and love. Each day was now a new beginning, and for the first time in a long while, I faced the future with gratitude and determination.